Who are you? Jan, when did you first realise that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? How did you get your first guests? Are you ready for some quick fire questions? Welcome to the JOD Pod, a micro podcast where we interview CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, authors, and coaches. Today we are joined by Jan Oris, the host of the Business Mindset podcast. Great to have you with us today, Jan.
Great to be here. How are you?
Doing fantastically well. So, Jan, for those of us who don't know Jan Oris, who are you?
Who am I? Jesus, that's a question for the millennials, that one. Well, I'm a freelance PHP web developer. That is my day job. That is what I do to make the dineros, so to speak. And aside from that, I have a podcast, like you just mentioned. I have the Business Mindset podcast, which is a podcast in Dutch, so it's not going to be accessible for most of your audience. But it's about entrepreneurship. So the reason being, I wanted to learn more about entrepreneurship. So my take on that was, why not be the center of the community? Why not, be proactive in getting to the learnings that I need? So I started to figure out a way to have conversations with entrepreneurs. And the first step was meetups, and that got scotched by something called COVID. Maybe you've heard of it. And then obviously a podcast was the next best thing. And I've had 12 conversations with awesome people, and I've learned a lot from it. So that's what I do.
And your podcast has got quite a unique twist insofar as you have two guests.
2 to 3, yeah.
One. Wow.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
How does that work?
3 is rather exceptional, though. It works in the way that I wanted to have a way for the guests to actually have some value from the podcast. So obviously, if you invite a guest to a podcast like you're doing right now, I get value from it in the sense that you share it, right? But the conversation itself, so the hours or 2 hours in my case, where you sit and talk, is basically lost to you, because what you do as a speaker, you talk about yourself and the things that you've done. You know all of this information. You learn nothing from it. So my take was, if I put two people next to each other that talk with each other rather than to me as the interviewer, they might actually learn something from themselves, from each other, I mean. And that was kind of my take on it. And also, because you get two people, you get different opinions, different conversations, different topics, they boil to the surface just because you have dialogue, which was actually much more valuable to me, because me being the host of the conversation, being the ignorant fool, so to speak, I have nothing to contribute. And in that sense, having two experts talking on a subject, I think that was more valuable to me. And it worked out great. If you listen to the results, and obviously you can't, and that's a shame, you can see like really interesting topics coming to the surface without me having to interject, which is amazing.
But one of the things I love about this, though, is that there's a vector, there's a direction that you're heading on with this, is that you want to be an entrepreneur. You want to be running your own business, and what you're doing is you're almost learning in public, and you're using a podcast as a way of leveraging that information and becoming the hub, as you say, of that community.
Right. Yeah, it's difficult to just randomly run up to a person and say, "Hey, teach me." Right? But if you give them a platform, you give them the opportunity to actually learn themselves, it makes it easier for them to say yes. And in that sense, what I've noticed for myself is if I have doubts, I tend to stop. And some people, they just run with their head against the wall and just keep going without any problems. For me, that's different. So what I needed to do is create the environment for myself where I have less friction. And one way to have less friction is to have more knowledge, have more perspective, to see the things coming a mile away, because you've, at least in my case, talked about them before. And that's kind of the reason why I wanted to do it this way, just because every person has a different story, every person has a different trajectory. By talking to one person, you only learn one thing. By talking to multiple people, you learn multiple things. And by getting this information out there, I learn a lot from these people themselves, and I get feedback from the people who listen to the conversation. So that's, that was kind of the thinking that I was going through at the time.
And also at the same time, you're building a network of people who are, we're naturally going to be interested in your development and how you're growing, and you can always kind of tap on that when you're more entrepreneurial endeavors come around. But I think building a community is huge now, and we advise, in my day job, we advise loads of businesses about their social media content, and invariably they've got their head in the sand because they're concentrating on their product. They're not thinking about their community, and you're going community first, which I think is, it's a fantastic way of going about things. One of the points of this podcast, or the ideas around this podcast, is to help inspire other people to try out new things and to step out of their comfort zone. Normally, I ask people where they get their first customer from, but how did you get your first guests booked into a podcast that didn't exist? It's something I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, my first guest. So I said earlier, I started with meetups, right? And that's actually where the idea was born. So the first meetup I did, I just randomly sent out invitations to a bunch of speakers, or not speakers, participants, like freelancers like myself. I think like 40 or so answered, and 10 actually made it to the event, which is low percentage, but that's beside the point. And during that conversation that we had on that particular night, the idea of a podcast came to mind. One of the people there was actually a guy who was just off of college and who thought about becoming a freelancer. And that's actually the first person I invited on the show, because the first topic was, should you become a freelancer or should you become an entrepreneur? And having knowledge about the topics that I wanted to talk about, I just basically tapped into my existing network and invited people that matched that particular subject. And after that, it's basically as simple as asking other people for connections, which is what I did recently. And off of the 24 people that I've already interviewed so far, I've gotten about 40 suggestions about people that I should interview. And at this point, I have to mark my words here, but I think I have 7 episodes scheduled at this point, whereas normally I'd have like maybe 1 scheduled-ish, just because of how difficult it is to have 2 people schedule a meeting. So the onset is the difficult part, the initial 5 or 6 episodes, and after that you just basically leverage the existing network that you have, that you just built up, like we talked about earlier, and just build from there. Yeah. And it felt difficult. It was difficult, but when I think about it right now, it makes perfect sense to kind of do it that way.
Awesome. But I think that's a great story for anybody looking to start, is that, the first few takes a bit of effort. You've got to push the stone. You've got to go and knock on the doors. You've got to go and have the conversations. And then if you're smart about it, you can leverage those. And then you build up momentum. You've got 7 episodes booked in now. Like, you can't stop that. You have to turn up. You have to talk to these people. That momentum will keep you going, and that will keep you motivated. That's really awesome. Jan, when did you first realize that you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
It's kind of, I think the first sense of it was actually when I did one of the classes I did in university it was called Business and Language, which was a really weird way of thinking about it. But anyway, it was a month in Manchester, in the University of Salford, with a group of people from Poland, from Germany, and long story short, we talked about entrepreneurship at that time, and that's kind of where my first experience came with entrepreneurship. And for me, I'm not sure there was ever a time where I knew for myself, like, I want to be an entrepreneur, but there was always the sense of, this is wrong, this should be better. And the only way you can actually fix those problems is by doing them, by fixing them, and then you naturally arrive at entrepreneurship. So I guess the first experience, the first exposure, I should say, was a bit of a nudge, but it didn't really hit in my brain. And after I was 22, 23, it came more naturally, and I got exposure to the rest of how the entrepreneurship scene works, basically.
I think that's fantastic. Entrepreneurs are a great catalyst for change. They notice problems. They come up with solutions. Sometimes the solutions work, sometimes they don't. And I think that's one of the great mindset shifts that is happening now, with loads of people looking to start their own business, is that people noticing problems and then trying to come up with solutions. That's fantastic. Jan, are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Knock yourself out.
You sure? What's your favorite app or SaaS product that you use every day?
I use Todoist, which is like the small to-do app on your phone. So it's a really relatively simple tool. It's not got everything that I would like it in there. I'd like a bit more of a getting things done vibe, if that makes sense. So scheduling tasks to today, this week, next week, or someday, something to that effect. You have to really pick the dates. But
So have you just recommended a tool that you think could be improved on?
I did.
Yeah. Okay. If only we knew a developer that could develop a tool like something like that. Let me know if you've heard of anyone, Jan, and we'll set up I'll put you two together. What's your most recommended book, Jan?
To be honest, I don't read many books. I think the book that I most often recommend is the 4-Hour Workweek. Although I have to add a caveat to that because it's a pretty old book, and most of the stuff in there, while the fundamentals are still good, you have to read it with a different kind of mindset, because it talks, when it comes to how you figure out your niche and everything, it talks about advertising in magazines, and that's obviously déclassé, should we say. So read it, acknowledge it, absorb it, but shift it to 21st century mindset.
You say that. Some niches still have magazines.
They do.
There's
they do,
steam engine enthusiasts, beekeepers, monthly. I'm sure there's magazines out there for some people, and that's where the riches are, in the niches, no?
No, they are, but the thing is, find a niche that has plenty of people with plenty of capital. And if you have a very small, within that niche, there's only a limited amount of people that actually read the magazine. So you're limiting yourself to a much smaller audience. So even if you do manage to do it that way, you'll still have to scale up to the online world anyway. So why not do it in the first place and cut out the middleman?
Fair enough, yeah. Who's your favorite YouTuber or podcaster at the moment?
Well, me, obviously.
You listen to your own podcast?
Sometimes I do. I have to, because I have to listen to all the gold that's in there. So,
okay.
But no. To be fair, I think Nick Nimmon's doing a great job, just because of how concise he is in delivering his message. And
so
also,
that's Nick Nimmons. Is he on? He's on YouTube, is he? That's the name of his channel.
I'll look it up for you. I don't know it offhand.
Okay.
I'll look it up and send it to you. He has a channel on how to improve your YouTube videos and everything. I think his delivery is very good on how he delivers his content. So
cool. And podcast?
I don't really listen to podcasts, to be honest.
Wow.
Which is weird as a podcaster, but I like to participate more than actually passively listen.
Fair enough. What would make you listen to more podcasts?
I think if I had a different schedule.
Mm-hmm.
If I was out on a walk every day, or if I had to do a bike ride or something like that, if I, had some dead space to fill, where a podcast would actually fill that time, that would be beneficial to me. But as it is right now, I'm busy with work a lot. So
yeah, lockdowns has probably impacted that a little bit. Yeah, that's fair enough. And who do you think the next Elon Musk or Denise Coates, the CEO of Bet365, might be?
Well, I don't Denise Coates, so I won't have an opinion on that. If I had to guess, one of the people that I admire a lot is actually one of the people that I did Startup Bus with. Startup Bus is like it's a startup event or weekend basically, where you sit on a bus with strangers and build a business. Funnily enough, I was on Startup Bus in 2015, and there was actually this woman. Her name is Wendy Gerard, which will make no sense to you from the English-speaking contingent of people. She was an architect. She had no experience with entrepreneurship, and that weekend was actually her first introduction into the entrepreneurial scene. And you can tell right away that she was really intelligent. She understood what it was, and she knew where she was going. And without any experience, she picked up on a lot of impressive things and asked the right questions, and she went full frontal for what she wanted, and that's really impressed to me. I'll send you. She has a startup called Colibri, where she helps you find the right house for you, depending on a whole bunch of factors, like public transport and everything that you want close or not close to your area. She kind of mixes that up into the mix. So it's really impressive how she actually does, and then keeps going with no experience at the time. That's really impressed me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and thanks for absolutely ruining any kind of transcription service that is trying to decipher what we're saying. Jan, where can people find you online?
Find me online. I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm in your living room right now. You're watching me right now. No, you can find me on my two main websites. I'm guessing my freelance website is not going to be as interesting to many people, just because that's not what I'm here for. My podcast website is businessmindset.be from Belgium, because that's where I'm from. My freelance website is exudra.be. I'll give you the links, just you don't have to write it down. And then you can also find me on the major social media channels like Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. You know, all the major suspects.
Jan, there we have it. Jan is the host of the Business Mindset podcast, where he sheds light on the unspoken secrets of entrepreneurship. He managed to get his first guest by setting up a meetup and getting chatting with the community, essentially scratching his own itch to invite people on and asking them questions to help him on his entrepreneurial journey. Jan's favourite app, although he thinks it has got a few rough edges, is Todoist. His most recommended book is The 4-Hour Workweek, but he adds a massive caveat to that to update it for maybe the more digital world. He loves watching Nick Nimmons on YouTube to help him improve his YouTube videos. Stay tuned for Jan's YouTube vlog coming soon, I'm sure. He thinks we should be keeping an eye on Den Heer Hut, a architect who Jan met at Startup Bus in 2015, who runs a startup called Calibre. We'll put links to those in the show notes so we can follow up on that and laugh at my pronunciation. And you can find out more about Jan and the Business Mindset podcast by heading to www.businessmindset.be, where there's links to all the subscriptions on Apple, Spotify, etc. Jan, thanks for joining us today on the JOD Pod.
Very welcome, man. Thank you very much for asking me.
No problems, pal. And thank you for joining us on the JOD Pod. To ensure that you don't miss any of these episodes, make sure that you subscribe, hit that like button, bang that bell. And if you've got any questions for Jan or me about his journey into entrepreneurship and running a podcast, leave them in the comments below. It makes both our lives just that little bit brighter and happier, and we'll be sure to answer every single one of them. So go be inspired by Jan today. Go and create a network on your own. Go build something and inspire the next generation. Thanks for joining us on the JOD Pod. If you enjoyed this interview, why don't you check out some of these other interviews that we've done on the JOD Pod. More inspirational CEOs, coaches, entrepreneurs, founders, and authors. I'm sure there's something here that will inspire you to build something new.